Monday, April 16th. I'm Rim.
I'm Scott.
And this is Geeknights. Tonight we talk a bit in entirely layman's terms about the history of CPUs and the battles between AMD and Intel.
Let's do this.
It rained a little bit.
A little.
A little.
It's still raining, though.
Yeah. You see, I was all excited. It was summer. Everything is beautiful. I was climbing the mountain.
It's not summer yet. It's still spring.
It's effectively summer. Remember, as far as I'm concerned, there are two seasons. Warm enough to run outside in shorts and not warm enough to run outside in shorts.
Yeah, Rim just sort of decides things for himself and acts like, the rest of the world doesn't exist.
I'm just generally indifferent to spring. Spring is just in my way to summer, and fall is just the last lingerings of summer. So pretty much...
I'm actually a fan more of real spring. I wish real spring would last
What do you mean
forever.
real spring? Real spring, it rains all the time, it's muddy, everything's mucky. You see all the leaves from the previous autumn that didn't rot yet?
See, in real spring, it's not cold, and it's warm, but it's not so warm that you sweat all over the place, which is perfect. It's like 65 degrees all the time. But of course, we don't have real spring. We've got shit.
I don't know really what you're talking about. It's spring. When did real spring happen?
When I was a kid.
I don't think spring was much different when you were a kid than it is now.
Plus, I like rain as long as it's not constant, insane, or, like this. Because this rain sucks. Where I go down to the train station in the morning and there's water burbling out of the sewer.
Except this rain really isn't too out of the norm for this area. And in fact, we had similar rainstorms last year.
Yeah, it sucked then, too.
And I lived here the year before, and you know what? Same kind of rainstorms.
Well, it sucked then also.
Yeah? It's not anything special. The interesting thing here is that it took me almost 4 hours to get to work.
Well, I mean, I can understand snow making it take 4 hours to get to work, but...
No, during that crazy blizzard where everyone was stranded on the highways all over around here and all the parkways were just covered in snow, I got home in an hour and a half. I just took the mountain back roads. There was no one on them. Just drove right through. But no, a little bit of rain. First, there's a rock slide on the road I normally take to work.
Don't they put, like, those metal things up to keep the rocks from falling down?
Yes.
Good job.
It was one hell of a little rock slide, and it covered the road, so whatever. Well, I sat there for an hour while they removed it, and in that hour, every single road to New York City flooded.
Yeah, I was at work, and I saw news that said the Taconic was flooded and closed at a bunch of places, and I tried to tell you, but you were not able to be talked to. And then I checked the trains, and they were like, yeah, there's some flooding at the Beacon train station. I'm like, shit.
Beacon train station floods once a year, and it's only that back parking lot.
That's what I was saying. I parked in the front parking lot, and I was like, oh, it's probably only the back parking lot. Sure enough, the back parking lot must have flooded and unflooded during the day sometime.
Only suckers park in that back parking lot.
Well, I think the people who park back there are people who have like been here for a long time, because that used to be the only parking lot, and it's people with permits. So I think the people who have permits and they've had them for a long time are the people who park back there, which I don't know why. You think they'd be smart enough by now to park somewhere else. I don't know. Yeah, but they closed. I think they were pretty smart, though, because they closed off the most flooded part of the parking lot this morning because no one was parked there, and there was yellow tape saying, don't park here.
Yeah, luckily with my work's policy, I pretty much just left work at the normal time, and it counts as a full day. But on the way home, I'm driving back, and I think I'm going to stop and get some ice cream or something, but I see this huge crowd of people standing by the old dam, the turn-of-the-century dam with the old mill connected to it on the little creek that goes through Beacon. And this giant crowd of people is just like looking around. A bunch of them have cameras. So I stop the car and I get out because what? They find a body? What's going on? I got to see what's going on here. And I happen to have my camera with me. And I hear a roar and I look and the creek has become a torrential, horrible river that is completely covered and is blasting across this dam at incredible velocity and volume.
You should have seen out the window of the train because the train is basically in between the Hudson River and the land. All the water coming down the sides of the land into the river. There was quite a lot of it. Especially when the train went like by some rocks. There was just water like flying off the rocks. And there was like whitewater rapids, only very small ones. So only mice in their little boats could go and have fun in that. But they were like maybe like 3 feet wide. But they were rushing down that mountain real quick. It was pretty fun.
Anyway, in tech news, I was nominally going to talk about this idea that Firefox looks like it's reaching the 25% mark in Europe, and it's almost at 50% in a bunch of countries like Finland. But I've got something much more important here. Because on Slashdot, there was some stupid article entitled, Is DVORAK gaining traction among coders? The answer is no. But,
well, when I was in college, there were nominally, those DVORAK guys. I know some of them.
I knew one, Steve.
Well, some of them were good guys, some of them were bad guys. But, there were always a few guys in the especially in the CS department. It was pretty much the only place to find these people. And they were like, yeah, DVORAK's the way to go.
Well, you see, most people's keyboards, because I don't think a lot of people know what DVORAK is, are QWERTY. If you wonder why it's called QWERTY, look at your keyboard and look at the second row from the top right under the numbers, and it should become apparent rather quickly why it is called QWERTY. DVORAK is called DVORAK for pretty much the same reason.
No, DVORAK is called DVORAK because the guy named DVORAK.
All right, I've never actually seen a DVORAK keyboard.
All the vowels are generally right under your fingers, and what the logic behind a DVORAK layout is that the most commonly used letters are all hit with your index fingers and then your middle finger, and the least used letters are out by the pinkies and things like that. So it's technically you should have to move your fingers the least distance possible to type any random text.
Well, the issue is that while a lot of people say, oh, DVORAK is more efficient, or oh, look, it's based on science, and QWERTY was made to slow down typists back when typewriters used to jam, and almost everyone I've ever met who uses DVORAK makes those two arguments. Well, in terms of the latter, that's complete horseshit. I'll get that out right now. QWERTY was designed for a bunch of reasons. None of them at all had to do with slowing typists down.
The number one reason that QWERTY was designed the way it was is that you didn't have to, because on a typewriter, you can't have two hammers from the same side come at once. So it was to alternate as much as possible while typing. That way you could actually go faster. And you know what? Alternating is sort of faster when you type, whether you have mechanical typewriters or not, because you're going left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right.
Yeah, a lot of people claim that, oh, QWERTY was made to slow people down, DVORAK is faster, blah, 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 but it turns out that QWERTY is actually a very, very efficient system of typing.
I mean, think about all the different possible ways you could lay out the letters without changing the way the keys are oriented, Just moving the letters around on the existing keys. There are like a zillion, jajillion ways you could possibly arrange those letters. And if you calculated the efficiency of typing in all possible layouts, QWERTY is one of the most efficient layouts possible. It's nowhere near the bottom.
Now, too, people say, oh, there's all these studies saying that DVORAK is X percentage more efficient, or X percentage more ergonomic,
doesn't give you carpal tunnels.
You can type faster on average. And there has never actually been a real, valid scientific study of any merit, and almost all those numbers are either made up or based on studies that are, let's say, have a dubious and tenuous grasp on science at best.
Yeah, I mean, DVORAK really isn't bad. I mean, it's not any worse than
See, now I
QWERTY.
submit that it is bad. And the reason it's bad is that, one, QWERTY is the standard the world over. So choosing to use DVORAK is basically saying, I am going to choose to use a very rarely used method of inputting data into a computer that will often cause me difficulty and will also cause difficulty to anyone else who attempts to use my computer.
Well, that's true. However, a lot of people have real easy ways to just switch their keyboard from QWERTY to DVORAK with like the push of a button. It's pretty much anyone using DVORAK has a key combination that'll do that.
Well, yeah, in the software, but the keyboard still looks wrong.
That's true, but you don't. If you're looking at the keyboard, you suck anyway, and it doesn't matter DVORAK or QWERTY.
Yeah, but the thing is, all the DVORAK people also buy the expensive DVORAK keyboard.
No, I noticed most DVORAK people just use a QWERTY keyboard or a blank keyboard. They don't even bother to get a DVORAK
Nah, a lot of the ones I knew at RIT actually bought old IBM keyboards where you can switch the keys around and move the keys around to make it DVORAK.
I've never seen anyone actually do that. And I've only actually seen maybe 2 keyboards you could actually buy that had the letters laid out.
In fact, a guy in one of my IT... Remember when we had all those AT keyboards we found?
Yep.
And we kept them for a while, then we threw them away? Someone asked me for one when he found out I had one because he wanted to make a DVORAK keyboard.
Well, most of the people I knew, no one ever actually cared about the letters being laid out that way. But even so, some people who use the DVORAK, they claim they can just switch back to QWERTY. And some people, when they actually do, I've actually seen them struggle going back to QWERTY. So I guess it comes down to, are you actually going to be able to avoid QWERTY? If not, can you just switch back and forth, or can you not? And I imagine some people can and some people can't.
Yep, especially considering that touch typing is mostly muscle memory and that sort of thing. I can't imagine it being efficient to have 2 entirely different systems that are mostly instinctual that you have to work with on a regular basis.
Yeah.
The main reason I bring this up is that this seems to come into the news cyclically, like every 6 months or so, where all the people who use DVORAK are like, yeah, DVORAK's better, blah, blah, blah. And I've found that the vast majority of people who use DVORAK are twats. Or posers. They use it because it's cool and hip to use. Or check it out. I use DVORAK, which is far superior to your commoner QWERTY.
Yeah. The only way I can respect someone who uses DVORAK is if they say, yeah, I just like it better, whatever. Because some people just, it's a matter of taste. It's not, more or less efficient, really. I mean, and if it is, we can't really tell. But for some people, it's more comfortable for them. Like,
yeah, at least they say it is.
More, yeah.
The thing is,
I'm not going to say that they're lying about something like that.
I've only ever met one person who wasn't just a pretentious twat about it, and that was our friend Steve.
Yep.
He's seriously the only person I've ever met, as far as I know, because there might be some closet DVORAK users out there, who actually uses it and isn't pretentious about it. And in fact, all the people other than Steve who use it always seem to bring it up more often than would be normally expected in a conversation.
Actually, you know what? The best DVORAK user would be someone who keeps it a secret. Like, before you use they have a QWERTY keyboard. Before you use their keyboard, they switch it so you don't know. That would be the best DVORAK user.
So I guess DVORAK's got to be a lot like religion?
It sort of is, in a way.
Yeah.
Because it's not based on facts or anything. It just...
Anyway, what do you got?
So, there's this big news story going around about how Adobe's putting DRMs and ads or something in Flash, and a lot of people didn't read the story and don't understand what it's actually saying.
Yep, there was a lot of FUD.
A lot of people are like, oh no, YouTube's will be full of ads and DRM, it's over. And I'm like, dude, what did you read? Did you even read this article?
Well,
are you
Scott,
sure you didn't read nothing?
For the benefit of all of the people out there, what is the actual story here?
Well, Adobe is... All right. Check this out. You got Flash, right? Flash does animations and things, but there's also Flash Video, which is what makes it things like YouTube and such possible. It's a way to put videos in Flash where you can download them pretty quick and watch them in your browser and everything's happy as long as your browser has Flash.
Don't have to worry about codecs or all the business we used to have to worry about.
Yep. No need to plug your media player into your browser as an embeddable whatever and then get codecs. It's just Flash Video, and if you have Flash, it plays. YouTube uses it. Everyone uses it. It's great. Adobe is going to add some features to the Flash Video. The features they're going to add are as follows. If you're making a Flash video, you will be able to make the video in such a way that you can force the person watching it to watch some ads. It doesn't mean every Flash video is going to be that way. It's just someone making a Flash video can choose to put some ads in it.
Or anything else. They could show you the meat spinning goatsy for 10 seconds before you get to see your content.
I imagine they could.
I imagine people will.
Yep. They're also adding a DRM feature. However, the DRM feature isn't going to keep you from watching Flash videos on a website. That's not what it's there for. It's there to cover for another feature they're adding, which is that you're going to be able to download Flash videos and then play them off your computer without having to be online or anything. So you could go, let's say YouTube implemented this feature. You could go onto YouTube, download a bunch of YouTube videos without having to use all the crazy Firefox plugins or whatever people are using to do it these days. Download them and watch them later. And if YouTube wants, they could make it so that when you download videos from YouTube, those videos have some DRMs so that you can't go copying them all over the internet. But it's only if YouTube wants. Basically, it's 3 features added to Flash that people who make Flash video can choose whether to use or not use. And I don't think YouTube's going to use it, considering they're still using the Flash 7.
Yeah, YouTube seems to be doing okay so far.
I don't see Google Video using this either. The only people I see using this are people who run other Flash video sites that already have ads in some way, and old school media companies who have videos on their sites. Like, you go to ComedyCentral.com, they'll make you watch an ad, and maybe, if you're lucky, they'll let you download something to watch later with a DRM.
If anything,
so that you can't copy it to all your friends.
I expect this to actually make YouTube more used or more popular, because YouTube is going to do it right and most likely either not implement this sort of thing at all or do it in a tasteful or sparing manner, while places like MetaCafe or all those other wannabe YouTubes are probably just going to go whole hog with the ads.
I imagine most people go whole hog with the ads, especially the people who are trying to make a lot of money as opposed to being owned by Google, don't need to make money. So yes, that clears that up for everyone, I hope. There are going to be bad features added to Flash Video, but no one's forcing anyone to use them, and it's up to the people who put the videos online whether to use them or not.
So my suggestion to everyone out there is whenever you see a story, particularly on Slashdot or Fark or Dig, in fact, the more inflammatory or frightening to you the headline is, the more dubious of it you should be, and the more you should probably, read the article, see what it actually says as opposed to OMG adds onto YouTube's.
Yep. And if you're like me, sometimes you read an article that you don't understand. Like, I'll read an article about some new medicine, and I'll say, I don't understand the fuck shit this article's saying, even though I read it. And then I ask someone who knows, because I don't know.
Granted, unlike you people out there, we have our resident scientists, so.
Yes. So if you read an article about something computery, and you don't understand it, or you're skeptical, and even though you read it, you're not sure you're 100% right, don't go saying stuff. Ask me first, because I know.
Things of the day. I hate to take something that's on the front page of Dig, especially when it's on the front page of Dig the day I do it.
That's okay, I'm taking something from Dig Videos. It's a lazy day.
I had to go with this one because, again, there wasn't much exciting on the internet. And two, I want to point out this kind of person, because this is one of those kinds of people that I really dislike and I run afoul of often. See, Quentin Tarantino is my man. He makes those kinds of movies that I like.
He hasn't made a movie I don't like. Not one.
Yeah, I can't think of a Tarantino movie that I've seen that I did not enjoy.
Sort of like Satoshi Kon, in a way.
Yeah.
Can't go wrong.
For now.
For
One
now.
day he'll turn on us.
If he turns on us, I'll just be the end. I won't watch movies anymore. I'll just watch the same ones over and over
Just
again.
watch Snatch and Boondock Saints over and over until you die.
I guess. I mean, think about it. All the old people, like our parents didn't catch on to new music. They just listened to music they listened to in the 70s and the 60s over and over again until today, and they're still listening to it. Why can't I watch the same movies from the 90s and the 2000s?
Well, I think part of that is that our parents listened to the Beatles and Led Zeppelin, and they're still some of the best bands around today.
But I mean, you don't see. It's not the point. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. But way back after Kill Bill came out, I don't know if this is one or two. I just watched this clip, and I did not do any research.
I'm pretty sure they're talking about one.
Yeah, but this kind of fugly-looking movie reviewer gets Quentin Tarantino on her show to talk about Kill Bill. Now, this is that kind of person I dislike.
The fat, indignant lady?
She's fat and indignant, but more importantly, she does this exact thing that I have had so many people do to me in my day. And while it's infuriating, at the same time, it's hilarious, because whenever someone does this to you, and take heed, anytime someone acts this way towards you, you have already won, because what you were saying is making them so uncomfortable that they will still be thinking about it tonight when they try to go to sleep, and you'll have already forgotten.
Or be laughing.
Yes.
If someone actually brings it up again, you'll be like,
Oh,
that's
yeah.
still around?
So she gets him on the show, and she's nominally talking about Kill Bill, but she obviously has an agenda. She obviously is going to corner him about some issue that got crawled off her butt, and she's going to make a stink about it and make him feel bad and make him look bad. Luckily, Quentin Tarantino is the man. So
he seems a little bit crazy, but it doesn't matter.
He's sitting there, and he's like, yeah, I made Kill Bill. I like
He's wearing a hockey
movies.
jersey.
Yes,
Everything is excused.
yes.
Everything's excused when you're wearing a hockey jersey.
I was going to point that out at the end. I was going to be like, and he was wearing a hockey jersey.
Yep.
But so he's all like, yeah, Kill Bill's awesome, blah, blah, blah. And then the woman, after a little bit of small talk, looks at a piece of paper and looks up and says, now, I want to make sure that you weren't misquoted here. So could you clarify? Did you actually say this? 12-year-olds should see Kill Bill.
And he's like, yeah, 12-year-olds should see it. At least the ones with the cool parents.
Yeah, he's like,
That's the kind of thing I would say. Like, yeah, what of it?
He's like, yeah, if a parent wants to bring their 12-year-old kid to see Kill Bill, I say great. I grew up watching violent movies. I grew up to make violent movies. I never hurt anybody.
It's a lot of fun. It's entertaining. It's not the real world. It's the fake world.
Now, the woman thinks that she has won the argument. And she gives that look of, ha, you have fallen into my clever trap. Watch as I humiliate you before the masses. For she thinks that now that he has admitted that, yes, he thinks 12-year-olds should watch Kill Bill, that somehow he has admitted something wrong, or that somehow she has now won this argument. And it couldn't be further from the truth, because she gets all indignant, and so you're saying that kids should watch violent movies, and she expected him to go, well, maybe, but instead he goes, yep, what you gonna do about it? And she starts getting really, really, really indignant, and she does that thing where she sits back, folds her arms, and does that smile of, I already won this argument. I'm going to sit here and let you talk, but I'm ignoring everything you say, because I know that the people are on my side, and that deep down in my bitter little heart, I'm right. And these doubts I'm feeling don't exist, and you're not making me uncomfortable. You're not touching a sore spot. Please stop talking.
And meanwhile, she's a fat, indignant lady, and Quentin Tarantino is, as she even admits, a really rich, famous movie guy wearing a hockey jersey. And people like him, and they don't like her.
So the next time you see people like this, remember this video, and remember that the moment someone gets that way, you've already won. Far and away.
Yeah, all you can do, because you're never going to beat them to where they'll be like, oh, you're right. Oh, that's not going to happen. All you can do is make them as uncomfortable as humanly possible.
And the funny thing is,
maybe they'll explode, which is the best outcome.
Because this happens all the time. Remember back with that Frank Zappa thing?
Yeah.
Where the guy's like, are you saying that blah, 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 blah? And Zappa's like,
fuck yeah.
Yeah? What? That's exactly what I'm saying. You are correct. That is my stance. What of it? And that always takes the thunder out of anyone who's trying to argue with you.
Well, generally that happens when people have a stance that other people, like they view the stance itself as inherently wrong, and there's no evidence on the outside of it. It's like they look at the stance itself, like, this lady says children shouldn't be watching violent movies, and she doesn't have any evidence either way, but she takes that statement in and of itself to be a wrong thing, as if I had said the sky was green.
Yep.
You know? So
in fact, this isn't a contest for a prize or anything, but all you listeners out there, that is in fact a fairly specific logical fallacy, and I'd like to see who posted in the forums first.
Let's see. Logical fallacy of no evidence?
No, there's a logical fallacy of taking an unfounded statement, or taking what would be an argument, making it as a statement, and then using that as the basis for further argumentation.
Oh, that's not quite what this is. But anyway.
It is, because her statement, she's taking as truth. She's not saying, if blah, 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 then blah. She's saying, blah, 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 unfounded assertion, therefore, you're wrong.
Yeah. So, I saw this cool thing on Dig Video today. You remember back at RIT, there was always those guys who were really into juggling and really into unicycling?
Yep, there was a lot of overlap in those two clubs.
There was a juggling club, and I don't know if it was a unicycling club, but there were some guys who were just geeks. Total geeks for juggling and total geeks for unicycling.
Actually, as far as I recall, I forget if it was the unicycling club, and there was a club, or the juggling club. But in terms of the sizes of clubs at RIT, it was pretty much the anime club was the biggest, the gaming club was the second biggest, right there it was like the juggling club.
Well, no, there was the Formula SAE guys.
Yeah, well, Formula SAE is a special case.
Yeah.
And so, because all the people who raced cars at RIT, a lot of people joined because they wanted to race the cars. But Scott and I were smart, and Scott was the one who asked, so what are the chances that I will ever...
That's the thing. When I went to RIT, you know, I didn't go there for the race car thing, because it was mostly an engineering, building a car thing, which has nothing to do with computer science. Not much, anyway. So, but I knew it was there, and I said, you know what? If I don't bother to ask, it's not going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, I don't care, because I wasn't expecting it anyway. So I went when I was a freshman, and I knew they had this program of Formula SAE, and I said, is there a chance I will ever race that car? Because that's the only thing I want to do. I don't know shit about engineering. I don't know shit about cars. I want to race the car because I know a lot about driving, and it's fun. And they said, no, there is no chance you will ever drive this car, freshman. And I said, thank you. Goodbye.
Yep.
You'll never see me again.
But a lot of the people who joined the club had these aspirations they would somehow get to drive the car. And I know for a fact that a very small percentage of people in that club ever got to even sit in that seat.
Yep. Very few people actually drive that car. I've seen it driving around. It's actually pretty fast.
Well, yeah, because I'd always, for club crap on the weekends, I'd go over to campus on like Sunday morning when no one's there.
And they block off a parking lot. They put cones out. And
yep, and they'd just be racing it around, doing times, futzing with it, putting different tires on.
Yep. Yep, never got to race that car. Anyway, there were unicycling guys at RIT. They unicycled to class. They unicycled around. When it was like spring and everyone was hanging out outside, they would do unicycle tricks in the quarter mile.
It was not an uncommon sight to be walking to class and to be passed by someone who was also going to class and has a backpack on, but who was on a unicycle and juggling.
Yep, but they're not doing it like for entertainment, like they're trying to entertain you. They're just unicycling to class just as normally as someone would bike to class or
I just
skateboard
realized,
to class.
Thinking back and looking at the things I saw on a daily basis, just walking to class at RIT, or looking out my window of my apartment, really make RIT look like this kind of bedlam, carnival, weird place where weird things happen.
That's why it was a great place to live.
It was.
But those guys, I realize now, were shitty at unicycling. They sucked at unicycling. I mean, in terms of transportation, they were better at unicycling than, say, me, who can't stand up on a unicycle at all. But
I can stand up for about 4 seconds.
I unicycled for about like 5 feet once, but they were not so good at the unicycling tricks. I mean, they could maybe spin around on the unicycle a couple times.
I wouldn't say that they suck, because even if you can't do a unicycle trick, being able to unicycle for any reasonable distance is a pretty cool feat, in my opinion.
That is the case. They definitely have the unicycling skills, but on the grand scale of unicycling skills, they were in the, amateur rank and file of unicyclers.
Yeah.
Even the best of them.
It's the difference between, in D&D, a level 1 character and a level 0 character. They were level 1.
It's the difference between the kid in your high school who's really good at baseball and the major league stars.
Yeah.
So, you're looking for the major league stars of unicycling. Where do you go? Well,
you might think Michael Godot, the circus.
No. I'm pretty sure the answer is China, because it looks Chinese to me. I can't tell. Don't yell at me if I'm wrong and it's some other Asian country. But here is a woman, who I think is a Chinese woman, unicycling better than I've seen anyone unicycle before. And she's doing a lot of fancy stuff. I mean, she falls off twice, but I can't tell if it's on purpose or not, so she wins. Watch this video and you will see possibly the world's best unicycling, or close to it.
I was actually doing my taxes at the time, but I looked up for a few seconds near the end, and I was duly impressed.
It's some crazy-ass unicycling going on.
So, this should be short and sweet, because it's coming on to computer buying season here at Geeknights, and Scott and I are both looking at buying new computers.
I'm looking a little later than Rim, but that's all right.
Yeah, but we're starting the process, because in my whole life, and Scott's been mostly the same way, I don't constantly keep abreast of exactly what is going on in, like, down low processor technology. Is this processor faster than this one? What motherboard chipset is currently the best one? What's going on with motherboards?
Yeah. There are some people, they subscribe to Maximum PC and they read Tom's Hardware every day.
Maximum PC was a great magazine in like 1997.
Yeah. There are those guys and they pay attention to overclocking, and every time a new chip and a new video card or a new anything comes out, they're on top of it. They know every single change in personal computer technology, and they're always on top, and they're always in the lead.
Now, I don't have time for that.
I don't have time for that either, so I only really pay attention when I need to build a computer. So when it's time to build a computer again, I go and I look, and maybe if 6 months has gone by and I haven't looked, I'll take a look just to see what's going on,
Yeah.
I'll go on Newegg, I'll put a computer together, see, what new technologies there are.
And, we'll know Intel's making new chips, or AMD has a new process, all the news, but we won't remember, well, there's actually 2 different cores on the new Intel Block chip, one of which has 4 megabytes of level 2 cache, and one of which has...
sometimes this bites me in the ass, because, they switched the ATX motherboard connectors to have 4 more pins.
To your credit, they hadn't changed that in a long time.
I know, how would I think that was going to change? But anyway.
I remember when there was a sudden, unexpected jump in the wattage required from a power supply to boot a modern motherboard.
Yep, that bit us again. It always seems to be power supplies that bite you, because they have the least news. Anyway.
But the only time it ever bit us was when we weren't looking for a computer. Because whenever it gets to that time, that time in a young man's life when he starts to notice the microprocessors and realizes that perhaps
he needs a bigger one.
Yes, perhaps a faster one, perhaps one that does not overheat.
Perhaps one that is bigger and faster than his friends.
And generally what I do, and I know a lot of people
so he can measure up.
You basically, 3 to 4 months before, I'm going to be building a computer sometime in the spring. So months before, you start researching a little bit. You start looking at Tom's Hardware. You look at the most recent benchmarks.
Tom's Hardware just got bought for a lot of money.
Ah, yeah. We didn't talk about that, did we?
It's not really that important.
Nah, I didn't even pay attention to who bought it.
Yeah, me either.
Watch, it's like Intel.
Yeah, but millions of dollars, eh? Go Tom.
Yeah, Tom has run a pretty good, generally reliable site for a long time, and I've often relied on his benchmarks.
Yep.
Granted, benchmarks aren't what they used to be, but that's a whole other show.
It's another show.
Benchmarks used to work. If you looked at 2 benchmarks, it was like, that chip is clearly 40% faster than that chip.
Nowadays, not so much.
Now it's just too complicated. But we're not going to talk... we've talked about how to build a computer before, but in terms of processors, just processors, and I guess as an extension of that, motherboards and motherboard chipsets, only because they're directly related to processors.
And sockets.
Yeah, and all that stuff. We're going to do, because these layman's terms computer shows have been really popular, we're going to talk about microprocessors for consumers in layman's terms from the perspective of the consumer of these goods. So people like us and people like you who build your own computers through the years, what the market has been like and how it's evolved, because it's actually kind of an interesting story.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about, like, the history behind them, like what was going on at the companies. We're not going to talk about the specific technologies that were added or how they work.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about RISC or CISC.
No, or any of those complicated processor things that you don't need to know. We're going to talk about what it was like to be someone building computers in the years like the late 90s through the current day, so the past decade, what it's been like as a nerd building computers in terms of processors.
Yep.
And how it's changed.
Because, I mean, brief history of the time up till that. 386, 486, you just bought a computer. They were all the same. You bought a computer, and it came
if you
with a chip.
if you weren't buying a Mac, you were buying an IBM. And
Yes.
the first IBM that you would buy, the first chip that was in the IBM PCs, was the 8086. And they just kept making it better. They came with the 286 and the 386 and the 486.
Yep, now they're all 86. Long story short, they're all based on the same original core set of instructions. We're not going to get into exactly what that means.
That's a whole nother show.
But every chip, every generation beyond that, has been mostly, to put it simply, an extension upon that instruction set, or some sort of modification to it, but for the most part, retaining backwards compatibility.
Yep, so a program written for a 386 will run on your current chip, which in all likelihood is a 686 if you have a computer that's modern. Of course, they've added instructions. Instead of going to 786 or 886 or anything like that, the way they've added instructions these days is to add things like MMX or 3D Now or MMX2 or SSE. That's how they add instructions.
Yes. Now, again, super oversimplifying. It's a really cool, interesting thing that we'll talk about some other day.
Yes.
But right after the 486 era, that was pretty much, as far as we were concerned, as far as geeks like us, that was about the point when it became feasible and, in fact, cost-effective to build your own computer instead of buying just a computer that came with a chip.
It also became the time where your chip actually sort of mattered. Like, up until then, you just got the highest numbered 86. I mean, no one said, oh, look, I have a better 386 than you do. There was so few choices. It was like a 386 66 or a 486 100.
And pretty much, like, once the 486 came out and became reasonably priced, you didn't buy 386s, they just disappeared.
Yeah.
When a 386 came out, 286s just disappeared. And the 486, it was so clear what was faster. The 486 SX2 was slower than the 486 SX4.
I had the 486 DX4. It was 100 megahertz. It was awesome.
Yep. And DX was just better than SX. It had to do with, God, I can't get into that.
It doesn't matter. Everything changed when Intel came out with the Pentium 1 at, I think it was at 60 megahertz or 75 or...
I don't even remember because I still had a 486 SX2 back then.
still had a 486 DX4 because it was still better than some of the earliest Pentium 1s. But when the Pentium 1 came out, it was a big deal. People actually started paying attention to chips. They were like, oh, the megahertz matter now, because that's what Intel advertised with the Pentium 1. Because before then, it was just buy a 486.
Or a 386.
Yeah.
And the store man might explain, DX is faster but costs a lot more money. SX is slower, but you won't notice the difference. Hence, I bought an SX because I was dumb.
When the Pentium 1 came out is when they started saying, hey, this is X megahertz.
You see, before
it's
then,
better.
People didn't know what megahertz were. No one would say, what's your clock speed, except super nerds.
Super nerds. There was no overclocking.
Yeah, people just didn't. Well, there was overclocking that the company let you do with overdrive, but that's another whole...
The turbo buttons on the case. Yeah.
Oh, God, the turbo buttons.
The turbo buttons, all right.
I could do a whole show on the turbo
I
button.
could do a whole show on the turbo button as well. Okay.
Yeah, computers used to have a button called turbo, and that's all I'm going to say.
So
you pretty much always left it pushed in.
If it even actually worked and wasn't just for show.
Yeah, well, I unpushed it once, and it immediately crashed. But even then, now... the only metric you had to go on was megahertz. And again, it was a direct relationship. The more megahertz, the faster your chip was. And also, there was really only one company making chips, and that was Intel.
Yep, you would get an Intel Pentium chip. As soon as the Intel beat out the plain old Intel made a lot of the 486s too, but as soon as the Pentiums were out, you pretty much...
Pentium was released in 1993.
Yeah, they sort of had a monopoly. It was like, which Pentium chip are you going to get? And you didn't have much of a choice. I mean, you could get a Cyrix, 586, but it was basically just crap. You would only get it if you were super nerdy or poor, or I don't know, but everyone just got a Pentium chip. That was it. Pentium was the win.
Yep. And while there were other chips available, like the K5, you see, we're AMD, we're talking, this is going to be Intel and AMD and kind of the evolution here. Back then, while AMD existed, and in fact, AMD had made 386s, 486s, all that stuff, as far as consumers were concerned, they didn't exist. No one had a K5.
No, I didn't even know what a K5 was until the K6 came out.
I had never heard of AMD until the K6-2.
Yeah, me either. But somehow there was a K1 through K5, K6-1.
Yeah, there's actually a really interesting story about how AMD, which is Advanced Micro Devices, came to be and how they competed with Intel, how they constantly sued Intel for antitrust, and how they won in a bunch of places like Japan.
And how somehow against this seeming monopoly of desktop PC processors, at least in the United States where we lived, by Intel and their Pentium chip, AMD did really well and is still doing relatively well. So kind of amazing.
But even that, back then, if you built a computer yourself, you got an Intel Pentium.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until the mid-late 90s, like the middling late 90s, that building computers became more than just buy the chip you can afford, put it in a motherboard you can afford.
Yep, I mean, in 1999, I think I built the Pentium 3 450.
Yeah, I had a Pentium 200, and then right before I went to RIT, I built a K7 system.
Yeah, I mean, the Pentium 1 was the hot shit when it was out, but it just basically kept trucking on. It was the Pentium 2, was just more and better. They added MMX, it was just more and better. You had to, now the chips just kept getting crazy faster, and your only choice was the newest, best Pentium. I mean, by the time the Pentium 3 was out, when I bought that 450, the choices were basically Pentium 3 350, Pentium 3 450, Pentium 3 500. That was the choice.
So, in 1997, AMD released the K6, which had somewhat comparable performance to the Pentium chips that would have been put at the same level. Yeah. And they weren't as fast as Pentium chips. I mean, while I say similar performance, they were definitely nowhere near as fast as Pentium chips. However, they were substantially cheaper.
Yep, I mean, it wasn't as fast, but for a lot less money, if you were building the computer, because no one sold a computer with a K6 in it, forget about that. You could get a computer working that could do some stuff for a lot less money, and you wouldn't have to buy a Pentium chip.
And I knew a few people. I started to read people were using these K6s, the K6-2, the K6-3.
See, I didn't really pay attention to them until when I bought my computer in 99, and I subscribed to Computer Shopper for a year. We could do a whole episode on Computer Shopper.
God.
But it used to be this big phone book. It's a magazine that still exists now. It's an oral magazine. But Computer Shopper used to be this inch-thick, gigantic thing that cost like $1, $2. And it would have, basically, half of it was not even half of it, like 20 pages was articles, and the rest was ads for computer stuff, because you didn't have Newegg to go to. So you'd go in there, and some people were advertising the K6-2. And the K6-2 was almost as good as the Pentium 3s of the time.
Yeah. Now, while they weren't as fast, they were definitely budget processors. And they had some problems. I had a lot of people who used them. They had problems with overheating or compatibility occasionally. Sometimes the motherboards weren't so great. There were all sorts of issues with them. But in terms of dollars per unit performance, they beat Intel by some stupid amount.
Yeah, I mean, the K6-2, it wasn't stupidly popular or anything, but a lot of people actually bought it. And I kept seeing more and more ads for it, and someone must have been buying these things. It wasn't me, because I was still using my Pentium 3.
Because you could build a computer that was almost as fast as an equivalent Pentium computer for hundreds and hundreds of dollars less money. Dollars less money. That was a wonderful construction.
I mean, I paid like hundreds of dollars for that Pentium 3, and the K6-2 was like $100 and change.
God, I paid some stupid amount of money for that Pentium 200.
Yeah, Pentium 2, 200.
So, Athlon K7. This is the era that a lot of people are familiar with, because this is when there was actually a choice. In fact, this is when the industry really got turned upside down, and AMD started doing better than Intel.
Yeah, basically what happened, I remember, the summer before RIT. Was it the summer before? It was when I went to RIT for college and careers. The first time I went to RIT, I wasn't a student yet.
It was August 1999.
I was thinking about being a student, and my roommate of 2 days, I forget who the guy was, he was just some guy, but he liked computers, and we talked about computers, and he was talking about the K7, which was the Athlon, the first Athlon, and how all indicators showed that it was probably going to be badass and not suck like the K6-2 sucked. and it'd still be cheaper than the Pentium 3 of the time.
In fact, all the compatibility issues were gone. The chip was just a badass chip, and for the same performance, take an Intel chip and the AMD chip that perform identically. The AMD chip was so much less money that only an idiot would have bought the Intel chip. There was absolutely no reason for someone building their own computer back then to buy an Intel chip. And this was a complete reversal from the way computers had been forever before that.
Yeah, I mean, the Athlon was coming, and it was hyped up. And, a lot of people didn't believe the hype. And then it came, and the people who believed the hype bought it. And then, of course, it was the real deal, and it just caught on, and it kept catching on.
1 year later, I built the $4,000 computer using an Athlon K7 800 megahertz processor.
Mm-hmm.
I used that computer up until near the end of RIT, where the motherboard exploded. I still have the chip, and the chip is still fine. The motherboard exploded. I had to buy a replacement motherboard. They didn't sell motherboards that took that chip. So I bought...
let's explain why.
Yes. Well, you see, chips for the longest time took sockets.
Well, they went into sockets. You look at a motherboard, and there's the part where the processor goes.
Now they're all
sockets
sockets again.
It's a little flat thing, and it's sort of a square with a square in the middle, and the chip has a bunch of pins on the bottom of it, and you drop it in, and you pull the lever, and your chip is now in the motherboard.
Chips were like that from the dawn of time up until this one little stint, and then they went back to that pretty much forever.
Yeah, that's the way chips are now. That's the way they used to be. But in this one period of time, the Pentium 3s and the original Athlons, they went into slots. It looked a lot, the place where your chip went looked like a PCI slot. Only your chip went in there, and your chip was on this board, and the board was surrounded by plastic, and that piece of plastic went into this thing that looked like a PCI slot. And it was called, for an Athlon, it was slot A, and for a Pentium, it was slot 1.
Yep, and they were mostly identical.
Mostly.
However, they were not compatible at all.
No, you couldn't put a slot A chip in a slot 1 motherboard.
Now, there was also slot 2 and slot B. Slot 2 was for server special chips from Intel, and slot B was nominally for server chips from AMD. But what we're talking about the consumer side, suffice to say, industry people ignored AMD up until very, very recently.
Yeah, pretty much, because Intel had a separate line of chips, the Xeon, which they still have.
Now,
and
back
if you were
then-
servering, that's what you bought.
Back then, a Xeon chip was amazingly, incredibly faster than anything else on the market.
Also incredibly, amazingly expensive.
They were thousands of dollars.
The main reason the Xeon was, and still is, really stupidly powerful is because it has so much cache on the chip. It had megabytes of cache on the chip.
This is back in the day when having like 256K of a tiny little cache was huge.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the reason they moved to this slot design was twofold. One, it was thought that you could cool chips better because chips were getting really, really hot around this time. This is when chips, there was this huge, because remember, right around the Pentium 400, 450, 500, 550 megahertz times, there was this long plateau where chips really weren't getting faster, and they weren't getting cheaper either. And everything just kind of stagnated for a while. And then suddenly there was this rush with the K7, 700, 800 megahertz, a gigahertz.
Well, the Pentium 3 got up to that fast also. But
Yeah, it did. But the AMD actually got there first.
Yep. But
they started getting really hot as a result.
Yes, this is also when people started overclocking. You know, people had a Pentium 3 500, and someone else had something else 800. They said, I can get this up to 800, and they could. They could get the motherboard to go from 100 megahertz to 133. They could up the multiplier by 1, and people were trying to get more and more out of their chips, and thus they were this is where all the people started getting crazy cooling devices and water cooling, and this is the era where all those things began, and now
I
they're
actually
everywhere.
overclocked because back then you got substantial performance increases.
Yeah, I overclocked that Pentium 3. I basically upped it by 1 bit at a time until it crashed, and then I went back down 1 bit, and I was able to make that computer last a lot longer than it would have lasted otherwise.
Yep, I overclocked my 800 megahertz pretty much to the limit I could overclock it without losing stability.
It helped that at the time I was using the 8-bit BX6 R2 motherboard.
To this day, one of the most stable
the best
motherboards
ever. Regardless of, now it's too slow to do anything, but the Intel BX motherboard chipset is the greatest motherboard chipset to ever exist. You could do anything to it, and it would just keep working. It still works now. I've still got it. I'm never getting rid of that thing. I think I still got it.
But remember we talked about how suddenly megahertz became the issue way back. People realized that, the higher that number is, the faster the chip is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, AMD and Intel kind of got into this megahertz race where they were both kind of fighting to see who got to gigahertz first, and also to try to win the public over with, look, our chips are faster. No, look, our chips are faster.
Mm-hmm.
And this is pretty much as a result of this, they weren't streamlining things. They weren't worried about power. They're worried about speed, raw, unbridled speed. So chips got hotter and hotter and hotter and used more and more power, needed more and more cooling. You could put cooling on both sides with these slots. Also, and this is probably the more important reason, this is when RAM and registers started getting a lot cheaper. Like, there was this huge dropout in the RAM market around this time, and suddenly it went from having some little amount of RAM to you just buy as much RAM as your motherboard could take, and it was so cheap you didn't even care.
Oh, I think it's because the RAM speeds didn't really go up. You know?
Well, that was right before DDR.
I know, it was PC 100 and PC 133 for the longest time, and DDR wasn't there yet, and people had just... They had not changed the RAM technology in so long, like a year or so, that they had factories churning this stuff out like crazy, and the price went down.
RAM was dirt cheap. In fact, we have like 4 gigabytes worth of that old RAM just laying around.
I got a lot of PC 100 and PC 133 RAM. I don't know what sticks work and which ones don't.
I have a full 2 gigs from my old computer, because when I got the new motherboard to replace the busted one, I had to get a DDR motherboard because they didn't make motherboards that took the old stuff and took the chip I wanted. So I had all this RAM laying around, buy all new RAM. But because this was cheaper, they started putting a lot more cache on processors. And in fact, they had level 1, level 2, and in many cases, level 3 caches. Not going to get into what those are.
I remember my 486, the L2 cache was little chips, 128K little bug chips you would put in the motherboard.
Yep.
That was crazy.
They started putting these extra caches on boards that were in this slot thing. There wouldn't be room in a socket. Inside of that plastic slot was a little board that had a bunch of caches on it and all sorts of circuitry. Now, technology marched on, and very rapidly it became more cost-effective, more feasible, and better to just put that RAM right on the die or near the die, and you didn't have to bother with these boards anymore, and slots just disappeared, and they'll probably never come back.
No, I think the slot is pretty much dead. It's pretty much sockets forever.
Yep. In fact, I bought one slot, and by the time my computer died, there were no more slots, and I had to buy a socket.
That's the same way it was for me.
Now, people sold these things where you could connect a slot into a socket, and those things never fucking worked.
Oh, people also sold things where you could put sockets into slots.
Those didn't work either.
Those didn't work either, but they were just stupid and unnecessary because a motherboard was cheap.
Now, this was the last time I paid attention, because back then it was just, buy the highest megahertz AMD K7 that you can afford. You try to get the optimal performance price ratio, and that was it.
Well, I think what happened next was you sort of had the Athlon and the Pentium 4, and they just kept fighting each other for years and years and years, getting faster and faster with not much changing. I mean, the Pentium 4 added the hyper-threading, which is just bullshit. It didn't really help you that much. The Athlon just kept getting faster and faster. They add, the Pentium would add a feature like SSE, and then the Athlon would add the 3D Now. And
now, this is what I find really interesting. For the longest time, AMD chips had there's the perception that they weren't as elegant or efficient. They were just raw power and a lot faster. And they just plugged through. While Intel's were slower, but more elegant, and as a result were much more powerful. And this really started coming into play with the Pentium 4 era, when suddenly it got reversed. And the Pentium 4s were just higher megahertz, but the AMDs got equivalent performance with less megahertz. And AMD actually started naming their chips no longer based on megahertz, but based on a number that they made up. It was like the equivalent clock speed.
Like, for example, my chip in my computer right now is an Athlon XP 2500. Supposedly, that means, according to AMD, at least in their marketing, that is roughly equivalent in speed to a 2.5 gigahertz Pentium 4. Where it's actually only a 1.8 gigahertz chip.
Yep, they never said that straight up to not get in trouble, but it was heavily implied.
That's what they meant. That's the reason they did it, because they didn't want people to think, hey, this AMD is 1.8 gigahertz and this Pentium 4 is 2.5 gigahertz.
Yep.
And in reality, okay, if you do the math, the Athlon was actually a faster chip. So putting the lower number on it is bad for marketing because people think it's slower who are stupid when it's actually faster.
See, the chip companies have put so much marketing power into getting people to understand megahertz equals speed that suddenly this was no longer the case.
Well, no longer the case for
Intel.
across different chips.
Yeah.
You know, when Intel originally had that marketing, it was so people would know that the higher megahertz Pentiums that cost more were better than the lower megahertz Pentiums.
And then
which was
AMD
true because they were the same chip, just one was faster.
AMD took advantage of that by making chips that were higher megahertz than Intel and then winning out in terms of the geek market.
Yep. It didn't help that the general architecture of the Pentium 4 was blah.
Yeah, the Pentium 4, suffice to say, was not a terribly great leap
Yes.
in performance or power.
So that era is now ended in the past year or so. And
Yeah, I mean, think for most of the time that people who, I guess, listen to
it
podcasts
lasted
today
like 3 or 4 years.
built computers, like that golden era of building computers from back in our young days, AMD was
Like
king.
2001 through 2005.
AMD was the undisputed king of building your own PC. There was no reason to get an Intel chip.
Well, people got Intel chips if they bought a pre-built computer like a Dell. 'Cause you
Yep.
couldn't. Well, sometimes you can get an AMD, but not often. And some people got an Intel because it is true. Remember that demo video we watched? It's absolutely true. If you had an Intel chip and you took the heatsink off, right, it would just stop working, and then you'd put the heatsink back on, it would start working again.
If you took
because
the heatsink off an AMD,
it would just set on fire.
Literally.
Literally.
it
Just
would catch fire.
smoke would just come out.
In fact, if you bumped your heatsink somehow while you're using an AMD and it was at all loaded, the processor, in terms of use, your processor would be broken and irreparably destroyed within seconds.
There's a famous video that the one I'm just talking about, where they were playing Quake 3 on a Pentium 4. They take the heatsink off. Quake 3 slows down to 0 FPS. They put the heatsink back on while the computer's running, and Quake 3 jumps back up to full FPS. They do the same thing to the AMD. Windows crashes, the screen goes blank, and the chip sets on fire. So the Pentium 4, while being less efficient, costing more money, not being quite as fast as the AMD per dollar spent, generally a bad purchasing decision when building a computer, did have some advantages in some areas, such as like power consumption and not setting on fire when you took the heatsink off.
Because you see, the brief history of these two companies is that AMD was the underdog, crap little company that kind of pulled through and made chips as best it could. And they generally didn't have a lot of R&D money, and they had to use other people's
Relatively
fabs.
less. They're making lots of money.
Yeah, but up until the K7 days, they didn't make a lot of money, and they didn't have a lot of money to invest into R&D, and any investment they made was a huge risk.
Mm-hmm.
Intel, meanwhile, was the world powerhouse monopoly of chip making.
Yep.
Intel had more money to put into R&D than AMD and all the Intel competitors combined.
That's why it was so amazing that when AMD came up in the first place as actually seriously competing, it was so amazing. It would be like if some other operating system came up and seriously competed with Windows and actually beat it for a time.
Yeah. I mean, AMD...
As opposed to just, Mac and Linux, which are still, while they have, market presence in terms of visualness, they got nothing.
In the K7 days... at least, and it was my perspective too, because I didn't know a lot about Intel back then. Now that I've worked for IBM and I'm older and wiser, I know a lot more about this, and I see how my optimism was misguided. AMD was beating Intel as far as any geek could see. Their chips were better and cheaper.
In terms of geeks building computers, home PCs, etc., etc.
Now, even for OEM stuff, the chips were better and cheaper. And a lot of people thought that people didn't use AMD in OEMs because it deals with Intel, which was partly true. Intel has been caught doing trust-like things many times. Intel is not your friend.
No, not really.
To put it very... but neither is AMD, even though they really like to pretend they are.
Yep.
But kind of like Nintendo. Yeah, we're your friend. Give us the money for the Wii. Games come next week.
Games come next week, year. Week mean year in Japanese, yes.
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 But AMD, in terms of... I mean, you could buy... The chips were awesome and stupid awesome. But AMD was not a mature company. They didn't have this tradition of engineering quality, and they didn't have the R&D, and they didn't have the massive fabs that they own. They couldn't put out enough chips to meet the demand of the OEMs, for one. And two, while we thought that AMD had won the war, and Intel wasn't doing well, Intel was actually losing money on their Pentium 4s for a while. And things weren't looking so great for Intel.
Did they really lose money in the Pentium 4s?
In terms of R&D versus money made in the early days.
Yeah, well, what ended up happening is Intel has a lot of R&D teams, and they had an R&D team in Israel. And those guys are real smart because they basically saved Intel from doom.
Yep, because Intel kind of disappeared from the face of geeks making computers, and everyone just ignored him.
Well, it didn't completely disappear. It was still there, but it wasn't...
It wasn't smart to get an
Like,
Intel
if you looked
chip.
at the... Like, Steam always does that thing where they see what hardware you're running, and they do a survey, and they show you the results. And I remember at the time, it was like 60-40 AMD Intel, or something like that.
And AMD usage was going up and going up and going up, but these Israeli engineers were very quietly just developing new architectures and new chips.
Yep, they took what is essentially the architecture of the Pentium 3, and they brought it up to speed, and they made the Core Solo and the Core Duo that you're using right now.
And when those were announced, and then when they came out, it really kind of flipped everything back around, because these chips are, in terms of megahertz, a lot slower than AMD chips.
In my work, I have this Dell Optiplex something. It has a Core 2 Duo in it. It's almost as good as it gets. Each of those two cores are 1.8 gigahertz each. The same as my AMD XP 2500. The same exact clock speed.
Yep.
Yet, comparatively, my computer is slow as shit, and the thing at work is stupid fast.
The Core 2s are faster in terms of getting work done than the AMD chips, megahertz per megahertz. In addition, they're a lot cleaner, a lot more efficient. They use a lot less power. They're a lot cooler. They're a lot more reliable. And the kicker, they're not really that much more expensive.
See, they are still more expensive. AMD has a line of also, AMD has been keeping pace as best they can. They have the X2 chips, which are dual-core AMDs. They came out with all their 64-bit stuff, which is sort of good, sort of bad. I don't want to talk about 64-bit stuff now, but the AMD is ahead in the 64-bit race, needless to say, but it's not that important. And they have their FX line, which is the stupid fast AMDs, but those are expensive, so you're not really making the price-performance win.
They're not really that expensive. The thing is, up until very recently, and this is why I keep oscillating back and forth between Intel and AMD, and I'm still not sure what I'm going to end up with, though I want a Core 2. The Core 2s were still a lot more expensive, but AMD has recently been slashing their prices repeatedly, and AMD chips are so cheap now that it's harkening back to the old days where, while the Core 2 is a far superior chip in almost all respects, you can get a chip that's almost as fast for a ludicrously cheaper price.
Yeah, it's like right now you can get a Core 2 Duo for like, what, $300, something like that?
Well, it currently, and it has been for the last week and a half, the E6600 Core 2, which is the sweet spot. That is the best chip on the curve of performance of the Core 2 right now in terms of price, is $308.
All right. How much is the roughly equivalent AMD X2?
It was at least $120 less.
See? It's like 2/3 the cost. Is it a third slower?
Well, it also gets complicated in that the AMD FXs and these new AMD chips do outperform the Core 2s on certain specific tasks.
Yep.
However, usually these are very computationally intensive benchmark kind of things. And real-world use cases, like running a game like Supreme Commander, the Core 2s kick the AMD's asses.
Well, I don't have a lot of experience with new AMD chips, but I have experience with the Core 2 Duo at work, and it's plenty fast. I wouldn't be upset if I had one.
Hell, the Core Solo that's in our Mac Mini, megahertz-wise, is pathetically slow. However, it's really fast, all things considered.
It plays video without skipping.
Yeah.
I mean, I have the slowest Core Solo imaginable in my new laptop. It's a Core Solo U1400. It's 1.2 gigahertz ultra low voltage. It's the weakest possible Core Solo, and it gets the job done. I mean, I can't play 3D games on it that well. I mean, maybe I could play Half-Life 1. I haven't tried, but it can play a video without skipping. It can web browse. It can word process, and the CPU is never the bottleneck in any of those cases.
So basically, the market has gone back and forth, and now I'm not sure where I should be because everything is still in flux. April 22nd, according to various sources, is the day that Intel is supposed to announce new chips and lower the prices of current chips. And that day is coming soon, and if those announcements happen, I might just buy a computer immediately.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah, that was based on a leaked memo, so we'll see what actually happens.
Just let it be known, everyone out there who, didn't live through all this Pentium, Intel, AMD, Athlon BS. It's been a back and forth over the years, And things are getting interesting right about now, and you should probably pay attention if you plan on buying computers.
Yeah, because pretty much the chip industry, it seems to go a whole bunch of building, and then it'll hit a sweet spot and sit there for a while. And it's like the perfect time to buy a new computer. You'll get the most bang for your buck. And then it'll be stable for a while, and then suddenly there'll be this new rush. And the current rush is just about to end. And there's no new rush coming until Intel is announced. And if these come to fruition, the next round of chip advancements are going to be more than like the previous several chip advancements
Well, they
combined.
keep talking about some stuff that's kind of silly. Like they talk about these quad core things, and it's like, all right, now they get into this realm where they talk about chips that are so expensive and so crazy that they're not practical for a personal computer. It's like no one at home needs a quad core.
That's only because
not
currently
now.
most software does not take advantage of multiple cores very well. I mean, Supreme Commander, which is a very computationally intensive game, uses 2 cores at best.
Yeah, the quad core is not necessary for home.
But that's
people
not what
now.
I'm talking about. Intel is basically, theoretically, going to be able to push the clock speeds of the current type of chips, the current Core 2s, that are already wickedly fast at like 2 gigahertz, up to 3 and 4 gigahertz with just a snap of the fingers.
We'll see about that.
These announcements are coming, and it doesn't look like this technology is going to be available until December, January. Yeah, that's so up in the air, I can't really say a date. But there's going to be a long sweet spot because things are starting to level out. And I think in the next few weeks, in fact, there's going to be a sweet spot buying time. And I think the next sweet spot is going to be next year around February.
Well,
that's total speculation based on Rim reading a bunch of articles for the past month.
Yeah, well, if AMD doesn't come out with some sort of new chip soon, it might be over. Because see, that's really what's going on here is if any company ever gets enough of a lead. See, the only reason AMD was able to get in the first place is because Intel was lagging. They didn't, advance the technology fast enough.
Yep.
And AMD was able to go faster with them. It's all an R&D race.
Yep.
So,
but Intel always has the advantage in R&D, and they just sat pat, made something amazing, and then threw it out to muck up everyone's works.
Oh, they didn't plan on coming out with these core duos and things. It was sort of, hooray, they saved us.
Yep. But now they're putting a lot of research into making the Core 2s faster and better.
Yep.
And I don't know what AMD is doing. I haven't seen any major press releases from them that interested me in a while.
Yeah, most of the things I see from AMD now involve
Our prices
ATI.
are going down. They're always dropping their prices while Intel is up in their performance.
Yeah, they're doing stuff with ATI, but not much stuff with the main Athlon action. But it's always a big race because as soon as one company gets ahead enough of the other company, that'll be it. It's over. Because if you can't keep up in the R&D race, you're done. You can never catch up because everything's patented. And if there's no way for you to make a chip fast enough to compete, it's just game over. You're done.
I mean, this is why, like, China always talked about making the Dragon CPU, their own independently developed CPU that wasn't beholden to any patents or anything. And as far as I've seen, that never came to fruition.
Well, I think they made it, but it's really slow and useless.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
All right. Because there was a flood, I'm going to go to bed because I have to get up early enough to check the weather and see if I can actually get to work tomorrow.
Yeah.
I might just not even bother. I might just not go to work.
I was half asleep all day at work, and so I need to go to bed so I don't sleep at work anymore.
Wuss.
Yeah.
This has been Geeknights with Rim and Scott. Special thanks to DJ Pretzel for the opening music.
Be sure to visit our website at www.frontrowcrew.com, where you'll find show notes, links, our awesome forum, a link to our Frapper map, and links to all the RSS feeds.
We say feeds plural because Geeknights airs 4 nights a week, covering 4 different brands of geekery. Mondays are science and technology. Tuesdays, we have video games, board games, and RPGs. Wednesdays are anime, manga, comic nights. And Thursdays are the catch-alls for various rants and tomfoolery.
You can send us feedback by email to geeknights@frontrowcrew.com. Or you can send audio feedback via Odeo. Just click the link that says Send Me an Odeo on the right side of our website.
If you like what you hear, you can catch the last 100 episodes in iTunes or in your favorite podcatcher. For the complete archives, visit the website, which has everything.
Geeknights is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike 2.5 license. This means you can do whatever you want with it as long as you give us credit, don't make money, and share it in kind. Geeknights is recorded live with no studio and no audience. But unlike those other late shows, it's actually recorded at night.